Yes, we're open. Living Faith with Needham UCC, a sermon podcast from the Congregational Church of Needham, United Church of Christ, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're invited and welcome. This sermon for Sunday, September 15th, 2024, is entitled, Be Careful Which God You Do or Don't Believe in. It's a reflection on a short story, Waiting for Joe, by Shalom Auslander, from his collection, Beware of God. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to find out more about our open and affirming ministries at the Congregational Church of Needham, United Church of Christ, simply head over to our website, www.needhamucc.org. Thank you.
So for anyone who might be worshiping with us for the first time today, whether among the 50 or so people who are here in the sanctuary or the 25 or so connections that are on Zoom, I just want to assure you that you are seeing correctly. And Tom, I don't know if we can show the center of the aisle on screen for folks there, but yes, you are seeing giant hamsters in a giant cage with a giant water bottle up front in the chancel here. And if you are a first-timer with us, I want to assure you that this is not an ordinary occurrence. This is rather extraordinary. And I'm also just delighted that everyone here on site, in the sanctuary at least, has taken this in stride. It's almost as if you know me. But these are Danish and Donut, and they are part of our sermon today, as are you all. I'm going to read this story. It's called Waiting for Joe, and it's from a book called Beware of God by author Shalom Auslander. Shalom Auslander was raised in a strictly Orthodox Jewish home in New York until he no longer was. And his book is full of razor-sharp black humor satire about the challenges and indeed the foibles of believing in God. And these hamsters, again, Danish and Donut, are here to help us reflect on that. And I need your help as well. Human beings have been telling stories about ourselves, particularly satirical stories, using animals to soften the blow since the days of Aesop and his fables. So we'll hear this today, I hope, with those ears. And my question for you, I'd ask you to think about this as you listen to the story. I'm going to ask you for not the moral of the story, but a moral from the story. Something you think this story might be asking us to think about or to do. And so with that, let's enter into the world of Waiting for Joe by Shalom Auslander. In the beginning, he was always on time. But it had been a long time since the beginning, longer than either Donut or Danish could remember. I don't get it, complained Danish. Isn't it time? It's time, answered Donut. It feels like it's time. It's time. Danish paced anxiously back and forth. Of course it was time. He knew it was time. He didn't need Donut to tell him that it was time. So where is he then? Asked Danish. If it's time, then where is he? I don't understand. Either he knows that it's time or he doesn't. Does he know that it's time? Donut sat curled up inside their cold, empty feeding bowl, focused intently on the doorknob of the apartment front door, believing with all his heart that at any moment the doorknob would turn, the door would open, and Joe would appear. We cannot pretend to think that we know what Joe knows and what Joe doesn't know, pronounced Donut. with a sharp twitch of his nose. We must only believe with all our heart that Joe knows. I bet he doesn't know, said Danish. He rose up on his hind legs and flailed uselessly at the glass walls until he became exhausted. Breathing heavily, he lumbered over to the water bottle that hung in the far corner and drew a few drops into his mouth. You non-believers are all the same, scoffed Donut. He pushed some dry cedar chips into a small, comfortable mound and settled down upon it. As if you were the first hamster to ever doubt him, he said. The first rodent to ever think, really. Who else but you, with your keen intellect, your contrarian insight, your moral bravery and conviction, who else could possibly come up with, what if Joe doesn't? What if Joe can't? Clothe your fear as integrity, Danish, but Joe knows who believes, and Joe knows who doesn't. Joe is here. Joe is there. Joe is simply everywhere. What if he never comes back? What if he's forgotten us? What if he's died? You look around at all your plastic tube highways and your fabulous habit trail and think you are special. But do ants not build anthills? Do bees not build hives? It is not what we build that makes us unique. It is what we believe. It is that we believe at all. Doubt, my dear Danish, is no great achievement. It is faith that sets us apart. Besides, added Donut, he left his wallet on the front table. He's got to come back. He did? asked Danish. He stood up on his back legs and squinted through the glass. Where? Donut walked over and stood beside Danish. There, on the table. Where? There. That? Yes. That's not a wallet, you idiot. Of course it's a wallet. It's a book, said Danish. It's not a book. Sure it is, said Danish. I can read the spine. Along Came a Spider by James Patterson. He dropped down and shook his head. Oh no, he does not. Donut squinted a moment longer. Damn, it was a paperback. Why would Joe abandon them? Why would he leave a sign for them right there on the foyer table and then make it not a sign? And why James Patterson? What did it all mean? He does not read James freaking Patterson, cried Danish. Our salvation, our provider? We must be out of our minds. It's a test, said Donut, as he curled back up in bed. He's testing our faith. Danish stood on his hind legs and flailed uselessly at the glass wall until he became exhausted. He took a drink of water, climbed up into the plastic tree house, and curled up into a tight, angry ball. I happen to find Patterson thought-provoking and suspenseful, Donut said after a moment. You what? Asked Danish. Did you just say you find James Patterson thought-provoking and suspenseful? Jeez, open your eyes, Donut. Don't you see what he's doing to us? Holding our food over our heads like this, dangling our fate over us like a banana raisin nut bar tied to the end of a stick. Look at you, Donut. Are you so desperate to believe in Joe that you're actually defending James Patterson? Cat and Mouse was a tight psychological thriller, said Donut. Like hell, said Danish. Donut closed his eyes. Hunger stabbed sharply at his stomach, but he would never admit it to Danish. Where the hell was Joe? Danish rummaged frantically through the seed shells and shavings that covered the floor of their transparent little world. He isn't coming, he said, looking for even a sliver of a husk of a shell of a seed. He isn't coming. Donut nestled deeper into his bed, eyes shut tight in fervent concentration. May he who has fed us yesterday, he prayed, feed us again today and tomorrow and forever. Amen. Yes, Danish suddenly shouted. Ha-ha! And he pulled a brown chunk of apple from beneath a small mound at the back of the cage and raised it victoriously overhead. Without even stopping to knock off the stray bits of cedar and pine needle that stuck to its sides, Danish opened his mouth wide and dropped it in. He made quite a show of chewing it, mmming and ohing and ahhing, finally swallowing it with a loud, dramatic gulp. He smiled, patted his stomach, and burped, a deep, long belch of satisfaction. He washed it down with a few drops of water and slid down to the floor with a contented sigh. Donut watched Danish, a sour mix of jealousy and disdain on his face. His stomach groaned. Where the hell was Joe? Donut stood up and stomped over to Danish, who looked up at him lazily. Well, demanded Donut. Well, what? Well, maybe you could give a little thanks, said Donut. Thanks? Asked Danish. To who? To Joe, Danish. To Joe. For what? For the apple he gave you. The apple he gave me, asked Danish. I found that apple myself. Do you think the apple just grew there? Donut shouted. How did the apple get there, Danish? We searched this cage 1,000 times and never found a thing. That apple was a miracle, a gift. Joe heard my prayers, and he brought forth upon this cage a holy apple. His stomach grumbled. Danish belched again and rubbed his belly with pride, except, Donut, that you didn't get any food. You asked, I received. Seems like a strange system to me. He sucked a piece of apple rind from between his teeth. Not that I'm complaining. Next time, if you would, ask him for a carrot. I simply must start getting more fiber. Joe grants food to those who need it most, replied Donut bitterly. Danish tired quickly of Donut's lectures, particularly when he was hungry, which he suddenly was again. He got back up and began searching again through the rough cedar chips that covered the floor. Donut dragged himself wearily back to his bed. The miracle of the apple had made him ravenous. Donut would never admit it. He was ashamed to even think it. But lately, he'd begun to doubt. Lately, Joe and his mysterious ways were beginning to make him angry. It was the same thing with him every day. Begging, thanks, begging. Verse, chorus, verse. Why me? Wondered Donut. It must have been his own fault. He must have sinned. He must have angered Joe somehow. Well, just last week, he had questioned why their litter wasn't changed more frequently. Perhaps there's a cedar shortage, he'd asked Danish sarcastically. It is a hardwood, you know. He had even complained aloud that their cage was too small. The chutzpah. Some hamsters don't even have a cage, let alone a habit trail and an exercise wheel. How could he have been so ungrateful? He barely even used the blessed exercise wheel, a beautiful exercise wheel that any hamster would love, and Donut had ever only used it once. He was ashamed of himself. No wonder there wasn't any food. Why should Joe give him anything more if he couldn't even appreciate what he'd already been given? Donut closed his eyes and silently thanked Joe for starving him in order to show him the error of his ways. "Forgive me," he prayed. And with that, Donut hurried out of his bed and climbed onto the exercise wheel. He ran as fast as he could, huffing and puffing, regret and retribution nipping at his heels. Danish, meanwhile, was growing mad. He'd been tricked by Joe. He was even hungrier now than he'd been before he had eaten Joe's cursed apple. "Oh, yes, very good, Joe. Yes, quite witty," shouted Danish. "Well done, old boy. Touché." Back on the exercise wheel, Donut could run no more. He stumbled back to bed. Danish stood on his hind legs and flailed uselessly at the glass walls until he became exhausted. Donut prayed. And behold, suddenly, the doorknob did turn. The apartment door did open, and Joe did appear. Danish peed in excitement. Donut pooped in fear. Joe was thin and pale, and he wore a rumpled brown suit and a horizontal striped clip-on tie. The badge hanging from his chest pocket read, "Mailroom." There was a woman with him, too, a woman Danish and Donut had never seen before. She was unattractive, with thin hair and thick glasses, and she and Joe wrestled their way through the doorway as one, groping and feeling and rubbing each other as if they had somehow lost the keys in each other's pants pockets. Joe groaned and tore open her blouse. Danish and Donut pressed their noses to the glass. "There had better be apples in there," said Danish. "Forgive me, Joe, for doubting you," prayed Donut. Joe lifted the woman into his arms. "To hell with dinner," he whispered lustfully. She threw her head back and laughed, and as they headed down the hallway toward his bedroom, Joe switched the living room lights off with his elbow. Darkness. Donut looked at Danish. Danish looked at Donut. "We brought this upon ourselves," said Donut. Danish stood on his hind legs and flailed uselessly at the glass walls until he became exhausted. Donut prayed. And here endeth our reading. And here begin the questions. What do you think amoral, not amoral, but amoral would be from this story that Shalom Auslander has written for us? Unlike most questions in a sermon, this is not rhetorical. What do you think? Have you ever found yourself feeling like either Danish or Donut? Have you ever felt yourself like a hamster running or not running on the wheel? Yeah, Isabel. Don't take anything for granted. It's always a good place to start. What else? Yeah, Stephanie. It raises the issue of unanswered prayer, which, when it's your prayer that has gone seemingly unanswered, it's more than just an issue, isn't it? It's an existential crisis. And certainly a crisis for how we think about God and our relationship with God. What else? Nancy. Oh, I like that. Just because you're waiting for something doesn't mean it's worth waiting for. Is that a good summation, you think? Yeah, it might be a little different than you thought. Alan? Let's just go right to the heart of it. Who or what is God? Do you have an answer for us, Alan? That is the point of these stories, right? From Aesop all the way down, is to see ourselves. And we don't necessarily need to be either donut or Danish exclusively, but we might find that at different times we are thinking more like one or the other, or even, God help us, both at the same time, or something else completely. What else? Yeah, Brandy. Don't blame God for things that just happen. I think what the challenge is to try and parse out what's just happening and what might be coming from God if we've been told that those are two different things. And they certainly can feel like two different things in the same time. What else? Yeah. Oh, so you are also, thank you, looking at Joe's responsibility. You never know who might be looking to you for answers or for help or support. You might be God to somebody else. We give our Calvinist ancestors a heart attack, but yes. Yeah, you are responsible for your relationship. What is our responsibility to one another? That, I see another. Yeah, Maria. Okay. Everybody has their own relationship, their own image, their own way they think about God or don't think about God. So it is risky to try and impose your point of view about God on somebody else. Thank you. What else? Yeah, Rob. Right, they were having an awfully heady argument, particularly, let's admit it, for hamsters in this moment. Very heady theological argument, but exhaustion is a word that speaks to our embodied experience. It's our bodies and our minds, unless we forget our minds are actually part of our body as well. But exhaustion, and also remember that exhaust really literally means like you're breathed out. It is all the breath in the spirit is gone from your body. In that moment, it is exhausted for you. Randy. Right, that your head and your body are this part of the same you. We cannot pull them apart. We've been seduced by Neoplatonist theology from the Greek period that tells us that our minds are separate from our bodies, and that in fact our minds are better and superior to our bodies. This, of course, is why men are superior to women, is that women are chained to your embodied experience in a way that men are not. This is the argument that has been made down through the centuries, why men are more rational, as if that were actually the case. As we think about that. Diane. That there's just no understanding Joe. Thank you. I like that. That's a very Job kind of answer as we think about a God who might be Joe for us. Job moves in mysterious ways. However, being told that Joe moves in mysterious ways as the answer to all of your questions can be exhausting in mind and body. Aaron. How you see and believe in God depends on your point of view. Absolutely. All of these things. And I'm so happy for the conversation that we've had about it. And this is not the moral, but this is where I ended up with this story, is actually the title of this sermon and the title of the image that's on the front of the bulletin. Be careful which God you do or don't believe in. That we can get trapped with the God that somebody handed us and thinking that this is the only God that we can believe in or the only God that we can't believe in. Does that make sense? I have had innumerable encounters with unchurched relatives of church members attending, let's say, Christmas Eve, who decide that as they're walking out of the service on Christmas Eve, along with hundreds of other people, this would be the time to ask me to defend the God that they don't believe in. Does that make sense? There are some people who get stuck thinking that there is only the one image of God that somebody handed them, and their only choice is to either believe past all reasoning and past all embodied experience, or to not believe past all reasoning and past all embodied experience in this one image of God, because somebody told them that was the only option. Both Danish and Donut are suffering because of their image of God, their image of Joe. Donut is suffering because he thinks that this God will punish him if he doesn't believe, or at least pretend really convincingly. And I just love that idea, that you're going to pretend so convincingly that God will be fooled, right? And Danish is stuck being angry at the God he was told that he should have to believe in, and has not been able to move on and find something else. And so let's see if I can do this. This is my embodied moral of the story. There is more to God. There certainly is more to God's holy word than just what someone else has handed us. And it's part of our responsibility and part of our joy and part of our challenge to try and get to know God for ourselves. Not just the faith, the hand-me-down faith that we've received that may or may not fit us very well. But thank goodness there is more to God than we can ask or even imagine. The door is open. And so, friends, if together we have heard a word from God, if you have heard a word from God here today, remember to give all honor and glory to our one God, Creator, Christ, and Holy Spirit. Amen.